Hey there, welcome back to my channel. I am Jacqueline Proper, and today we are talking about how to be a good submissive. Now, on the last episode that I just did, it was all about how to be a good Dom, how to be a good dominant, and I honestly just can't leave things uneven like that. So I want to do a whole episode based on the energetics of submission and how to understand submission better. This can be for anybody who considers themselves submissive, sub-curious, maybe you want to try out submission in the bedroom, and even for some seasoned submissives out there, hopefully you will gain something from this episode. Now, just to start off, society and in general, you think submission, you think weakness, but it's actually quite the opposite. Submission is actually an act of profound trust, vulnerability, self-awareness. It takes a lot of strength and bravery to give yourself up into submission. It's not about being passive or blindly obedient. And you do want to look at when you are giving your submission to another person that it is a sacred gift. And this is the paradox, right? You think, oh, the Dom is in charge, the Dom is running the show, when really in a dominant and submissive dynamic, the submissive is the one that's actually holding all the power. They're the one that's holding the gift. The dominant has no power without the submissive say so. And I should say submission isn't about giving up your power. It's more about channeling that power into surrender. And just like a Dom really needs to build a foundation of trust with the sub, as a submissive, you also want to build trust with your Dom by being an open communicator. Let's talk about submissive mindset a little bit. You really want to recognize your own agency in the dynamic. And this is where I'm going to call out conscious versus unconscious submission. You might have all these fantasies where you are deeply submitting sexually. There may be an underlying reason that you're not conscious of. For example, it might be you deeply crave expressing vulnerability because you've repressed vulnerability in a lot of your life. Or you might want to express more of your feminine side because a lot of your feminine side has been repressed in your day-to-day life. Maybe you live in a very masculine way or a very dominant way. Maybe you're in charge of a lot of people in your everyday waking life. So these fantasies are basically counterbalancing for your psyche. So if you're confused as to why you have these fantasies, start to pop the hood a little bit and think about, what is it about this particular fantasy? I like to think about our sexual fantasies as like waking dreams, kind of. Think about the sexiest scenario that you can and think about it as if it were a dream. Interpret the symbolism of your sexual fantasy and you will find deeper unconscious layers as to perhaps why you are interested in this fantasy. And this is a form of shadow work, right? Because offering up submission is you are offering up things like control. You are offering up your vulnerability. You are perhaps going to some edgy areas on things that you're not allowed to do in your everyday waking life. And for some submissives, especially ones that haven't done a lot of shadow work, they're still operating in their submission kind of unconsciously, there might be a lot more shame wrapped up in these desires. So part of this work of your submission is to shed yourself of the shame. Shed yourself of the shame. I don't know, it's a tongue twister. But basically, you're going to want to come in having a little bit of self-knowledge as to why you might perhaps be into these things, especially if you are dealing with a lot of shame. Now, some people might enjoy very physical submission, think like bondage, flogging, impact play, this kind of stuff, especially for folks that are neurodivergent or asexual. They actually just might like the sensory experience of submission. It's always a question of how much of this submission that I want to do involves my mind versus my body. And you really want to understand what your desires, what your limits are, what your boundaries are, what your edges are, things that you might be willing to try. Sit with what are the ideal fantasies that I have. And also, it's okay to not want to act them out either. You might have submissive fantasies that you can act out in your mind, and they can be very pleasurable for you and bring you balance. And there might be other fantasies that you really want to try out in an embodied way. Especially if you're new to this, I would just sit down with your fantasies. And again, like I said, work through them like it's a waking dream. What's the symbolism of these fantasies? Are these fantasies that I want to bring out into the real world? If I were to bring them out in the real world, What are my boundaries? What are my needs? What are my limits? Because if you can't really articulate these things, you are not going to align with a good dom. You're going to align with the bad dom or an inexperienced dom that might do more harm than good. I'll just give an example here of the conscious versus unconscious submission. Conscious submission is, okay, I want to engage in this fantasy. I'm going to work through my layers of shame. I'm going to do my shadow work, and I'm going to have a nice communicative opening dialogue with someone who can be my dominant in the scene. And then you get to fulfill your fantasy, have these things acted out. All great, all good. The flip side of that is I have these desires for submission. I have a lot of shame around it. I will compulsively watch porn around it. I go in shame spirals. I then perhaps get intoxicated, or perhaps I get with an abusive partner because it's filling this need that I have, but it's very unconscious. So you might be more likely to find yourself in scenarios where you're not in control, where you're forced to surrender, where you're forced to be vulnerable in ways that can be traumatic. Because here's the thing about your unconscious mind, it always wants to express itself. And if you aren't consciously working with these energies, it will unconsciously direct your life in ways that you might not want it to. Also understand that your role as a sub is that's a collaborative dynamic with your dom. Your dom is usually honing their growth and leadership skills. So it's really important that you also still treat your dom as human, especially in the aftercare or after scene conversations, and feel free to give them feedback, communicate with them. What did you like? What would you like done differently next time? Be able to have that open dialogue. Just because they were the dom in that scene doesn't mean that they're the dom of you personally, unless, of course, you are doing lifestyle submission. But even still in lifestyle submission, your dom should have a space for you where you're able to communicate, bring up concerns, and adjust the relationship if need be. And there's lots of different archetypes that you're going to channel as a submissive. The innocent is one, or like the maiden or the child. It might be the devotee, the slave, the servant. There are many different archetypes that show up in submission. And again, I did a workshop on this. I will link it in the show notes if you want to watch the replay. But really just approaching BDSM scenes or submission scenes with a sense of play and exploration. Because now I'm going to talk about all of the challenges or pitfalls that some subs can fall into. One, a big one, is codependence. Some people are attracted to the idea of having a dom because they don't really want to take responsibility for their lives. Or there is some mother or father complex that hasn't been addressed that is being projected onto the dom. And how do you know if this is you? If you're going out of your way to please your dom, if you're really sacrificing yourself all the time to please your dom, if you find yourself obsessing over your dom, you should have love and respect for your dom, but you do not want this like needy, codependent type of energy. And that's what I would say you're submitting from ego. Your ego is totally involved in the submission journey. Your ego wants reassurance. Your ego wants to people please. Your ego is looking for attention. Like, this is where you want to stop and do some of the deeper inner work of, am I escaping myself through my desire to be with a dominant partner? If you find yourself lacking boundaries, if you find yourself getting overly attached, if you find yourself getting needy or feeling like you're truly powerless, then you should be reevaluating your submissive dynamic. A good sub always has their well-being first and foremost. They will stand up for themselves and they will walk away from a dynamic if it's not healthy. I truly see submission as a totally brave act. I feel like a lot of people that are drawn to submission, they're also really drawn to doing shadow work. They're also really drawn to getting to know themselves better. You're not really just submitting to the dom, you're submitting to these parts of yourself that want care, that want to express vulnerability, that want connection. And there is so much potential for healing in this type of container. Because if you have been through something that was either traumatic or conditioning that you feel like had a negative impact on your life, replaying out this energy in a container that also includes pleasure for you can help rewire pathways in your mind, in your nervous system, that will get you to a place of wholeness, integration. Submission in itself is a very embodied form of shadow work. Like, there are so many ways you could use it in a practical level. Like, let's say you are a public speaker or you do a lot of speaking engagements for your job. Well, it might be really hot to be ball gagged so you can't speak for an hour. Or maybe you had a childhood that was less than perfect. Maybe playing a little in a mommy dom or daddy dom kind of situation could be really regulating for your nervous system. Hell, maybe you're a leader, you're charismatic, and you show up in the world using your ego all of the time as part of your purpose or part of your path. It might be really balancing and sexy to be humiliated in the bedroom. Anyway, some of the best people I've ever met are submissive, so I'm very pro sub. Clearly, I did pro dominatrix work. I've met a lot of people that engage in submission, but I really look at people that do submission work, or they really lean into this submission exploration. They are essentially explorers of the cavern of their own unconscious mind. It's really cool to see. If you're interested in submission, I promise you are cool, you are strong, you are brave. There is nothing to be ashamed of. Now, if you are interested in doing more embodied submission, it's really important that you find the right partner that can play out this dominant role. And sadly, I feel like the dom to sub ratio is a little imbalanced. There's a lot more subs than there are for probably qualified doms, but put yourself out there, know what your boundaries are, know what you want, and be able to communicate. Ideally, when you're vetting doms, you're going to want to also make sure that they're good communicators, find out how they feel about things like aftercare, because aftercare, I didn't really go into that, but one of the most important components of submission is also having a follow-up aftercare practice with their dom, because this kind of helps close the loop in the nervous system and provide this like safe space after something that our ego might find quote unquote traumatic. So you want to make sure that the dom that you're working with, or the person that's going to play out the scene with you, really understands the importance of that. It's also really important that your dom has done their own work and that they have experience. The most important thing is to listen to your gut. You can connect with doms usually at things like BDSM munches, which are meetups. Depending on your geography, there might be local clubs or dungeons where you might be able to meet people. If you are partnered, there are ways that you can talk to your partner about potentially employing the role of your dom. There are plenty of pro doms or kink-friendly sex workers out there. Most of them are women, though. Unfortunately, there's a lack of men in this professional space. I think there should be more. If you're a conscious male dom, or you're interested in conscious male doming, please reach out to me. Or anyone that's listening, if you know one, please reach out to me. But basically, you want to understand, why are they into domination? What are their values? What do they enjoy to do? What is their specialties? You'll find that some doms are just like, oh yeah, I'm just, I'm a rigger. I basically just tie people up. There might be people that really specialize in one dynamic. So you want to just get out there and talk to people. If you're in it for more of the mental side, there's also plenty of good cyber doms out there. There's also a lot of bad ones. So again, just make sure that you're having lots of communication and conversation before entering into a dynamic. Again, it's where I started this whole episode, which is like, know thyself, know what you're into, know what your limits are, and be able to communicate them. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that, but that is really, in essence, what it is to be a good sub. To the point where I feel like I just keep repeating myself now, so the episode's probably over. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. I don't really have anything to announce right now. I do have something in the works for a workshop that's going to be perhaps next month or early January. And it's going to be focused on the intersection between the body and Jungian psychology. So like body shadow, body complex. So if you're interested in that, just get on my email list. You get a free sexual shadow work guide if you sign up for my email. You can find that in the show notes.